is y'all? It's your boy Jay back at it again. Today we got Why'd You Rather Live in 1325 than 2025 about medieval mindset. Y'all know what to do. It's following both Jays here, Jays there. Get tapped on my socials. Without further ado, let's get started.
Sure, iPhones and penicillin and electricity are pretty great. I'm not saying I want to get rid of our modern standards of living, but I'm here to sell you on the idea of having a truly medieval soul. Let's hop back in time 700 years because the Middle Ages get a bad rap and you deserve to know what life was really like. The year is 1325 and we're in Western Europe. Even though things would get a little hairy a few decades later, for now it's not a bad time to live. The Black Death hasn't hit yet and the 100 Years' War hasn't started either. England is in a fragile peace. Across the channel, France is under the leadership of Charles IV, and his court is this hotspot of luxury and intrigue. In the Low Countries, cities like Bruges and Ghent are booming centers of trade.
But them niggas don't got no toilets though. Niggas is throwing boo-boo. Like you may be right about like the freedom and cause you're gonna talk about the freedom, cause people back in the day, they basically did what they felt like doing for real. Like you woke up when you want to, you marry who you want to. I don't know about all that, but you basically do what you want work-wise and all that. But it's like, I don't know, bro. Niggas ain't had no toilets, gang.
And their canals are choked with barges of English wool and French wine. The French chronicler Jean Lebel said of this time period, the world was full of life and of splendid pride. And he was right. This was an age that still had some confidence in itself, that had some hope for the future, and it was noisy.
Before the Black Plague and all the horrific shit happened.
And colorful and deeply human. Despite what your history teacher might have told you, if you had to live sometime in history, you could do worse than 1325. Let's start at the beginning and talk.
You can do worse, nigga. World War II in Poland. Shit, Vietnam, nigga. Like you can definitely do worse than this.
A little about medieval childhood. To be a kid in 1325 was to be wild and free, exploring the world without much supervision, just like your parents did in the 60s and 70s. Medieval parenting was pretty hands-off generally, mostly because infant mortality was high, and before you made it to age 7, you weren't really considered to be fully here.
Yeah, if once you made it to like 7 or 8, bro, it was like, alright, this little nigga might be alright. Cause the reason life expectancy was so low wasn't because people didn't live long, but mainly because child morality was so high that it brought the average age of living down.
You can see pretty much all parts of daily life depicted in medieval art, from dancing to making love to cooking meals and celebrating mass, but you don't really see parenting depicted.
Money that the meals ain't had no seasoning on them hoes, not a bit of salt. Not a bit of pepper on the bit. You know them hoes is just dry as fuck.
At all. As historian Barbara Tuchman puts it, medieval art shows the Madonna, not the mother. Life advice manuals were super popular at the time, and they covered all kinds of topics like how to make spiced wine, or how to clean your fingernails, or why you shouldn't wipe your boogers on the tablecloth at a banquet, but they don't mention parenting. There definitely wasn't any gentle parenting, and even though childhood only lasted about 6 years before you became a miniature adult, it was real. We imagine the Middle Ages as this dark and serious time, but kids were constantly playing. Archaeologists have found cool stuff like toy knights carved from wood and dolls with movable limbs buried in cottage floors, which gives us evidence that children dreamed and played back then just like ours do today, but without a constant stream of brain rot. But when they grew up, what was the world they entered into? What did it sound like and smell like and feel like? Well, if you could borrow someone's eyes from 1325, the modern world would just look gray and empty in comparison.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
The judge historian
I definitely think that the world back then was more beautiful. Niggas was living in them was the homes they had character, bro. It's something about the medieval architecture style that just oozes out charm compared to the fucking skyscrapers today. But I ain't gonna lie, they had it. In terms of natural beauty, peace, quiet, tranquility, they definitely had it, bro. I ain't gonna lie.
Historian Johann Huizinga describes the late Middle Ages as a world of violent contrasts. What he means by that is people weren't afraid to feel, and they weren't worried about being cringe. Joy, grief, faith, love, everything was experienced in the extreme. Most people were young.
Oh, my mom calling me. Hello? Alright.
50% of the population was younger than 21, and a third of the population was younger than 14, which is actually insane to think about. When you read about some of the behavior of famous medieval figures, you notice that they tend to be weirdly childish and impulsive, and maybe that can be explained by the fact that many of them were shockingly young. The youth defined the era, and towns and villages were full of this restless energy. Walking through the markets would have been a crazy blur. You'd constantly hear church bells clanging and street preachers shouting revelations to huge crowds that wept and cheered. There was just an electricity in the air, and part of that was because the divine was so close you could reach out and touch it.
That type of architecture, this is called
electricity in the air, and part
this is called
that was because the divine
they knew what they was cooking,
was so close you could reach out and touch it. God's sovereignty was everywhere, and medieval people were comfortable with the idea of looking at a sunset or a creature in the forest and just pondering the beauty of creation. A monk might see a rainbow and burst into tears because it was, to him, God's brushstroke in the sky. Mystics like Meister Eckhart spoke of finding God in the silent stillness of the soul, while the visionary Angela Foligno described herself as inebriated with the love of the divine. Faith wasn't really something you chose, it was something you breathed. People certainly still
societies back in the day, nigga, if you was not religious, they kicking your ass up on everything I love, boy. If you not a religious ass nigga, they gonna be like, off with his head, all that shit.
And there are countless stories of priests who kept lovers on the side, or village bailiffs who spent all their money gambling, but that didn't keep them away from extreme shows of piety. The medieval mind was comfortable with these kinds of contradictions because they believed that everything was pretty much as it should be. Huizinga wrote that medieval people lived in a perpetual sense of participation in a divine order, meaning to them every object and every act had layers of meaning. But let's take a minute to really try and imagine the physical reality of medieval life. Like, we fell asleep in 2025 and woke up in 1325, what would that experience be like? The first sound we'd hear would be the bells that ordered medieval life. In the morning, noon, evening, for matins, vespers, compline, bells ruled the hours, although mechanical clocks would have just been coming into use around this time. If you popped your head outside the window, you'd hear carts clattering over cobblestones, pigs squealing in the mud, merchants shouting out the daily prices for bread and fish. There would almost certainly be a preacher calling out the latest miracle, and maybe from the next street a minstrel would be playing a love song about Charlemagne, because there was nothing medieval people loved more than romanticizing their own history. If you decided to go for a stroll, the air would smell like smoke and horse manure, and probably more than a little BO, but also of fresh baked bread and spiced meats. And forget what you think you know about the brown and muddy Middle Ages, because everywhere you look there would be a ton of color. Medieval drip was absolutely immaculate, and nobody talks about this. Peasants wore russet and green.
Oh yeah, bro, I ain't gonna lie, medieval drip might be cold, bro. Like the cloak, I feel like, bro, niggas in the Black Death was showing up drippy as fuck. I know y'all seen the Plague Doctor uniforms. Them niggas was putting that niggas was opium.
Merchants wore blue, red, and striped hose. Nobles were rocking cloth of gold and bright silk. Some contemporary writers were actually scandalized that tunics were starting to get shorter, and you could actually see the butt and crotch of people's pants, which is, of course,
absolutely. Well, nah, not really insane anymore.
Really horrifying stuff. Huizinga wrote, the love of splendor was universal. Even the poorest decorated their walls with flowers or hung colored cloth on feast days. Now, if you kept walking, you'd inevitably see beggars at the church door, but also barons on horseback in the same street, which is actually pretty similar to what you see in modern cities, which is finance bros in suits walking past massive homeless encampments. The only difference is that to our modern minds, medieval city life sounds chaotic and also a little gross. But to them, it all made up a kind of harmony. Everything had its place in the great chain of being. An angel.
You're saying that niggas in medieval is more tapped into this spiritual shit, which honestly makes sense, because they didn't have much else to do, man. All you did was work the land, build plows and shit. What else is there to do, nigga? You ain't had no phone. Shit, the only thing you can do is read, meditate, all that shit, bro. I ain't gonna lie.
Kings, merchants, and beggars were all under God's control. Even time itself was different, and I probably don't need to tell you that the world moved much slower 700 years ago. There weren't any minutes, and there definitely weren't the kind of insane deadlines you find in modern work, just seasons and saints' days. Medieval chroniclers
is just chilling, bro, and I respect that, bro. You know what I'm saying? Be one with the world. Just on some calm shit.
There's talked about how the world moves according to prayer, but even by 1325, it was starting to move according to profit too. The merchant class was rising, and you can see the seeds of capitalism starting to be sown. But with that being said, the mentality of the people wasn't quite there yet overall, and to them, the hours of man followed the hours of God. Maybe you're getting a sense now of the rhythms and sounds of medieval life, and learning played into all of that too. If you grew up in the nobility, you would would study Latin, basic arithmetic, history, scripture. There's this weird myth I see all the time about medieval history that Europe just completely fell out of touch with all classical learning until smack dab in the middle of the Renaissance, when all of a sudden it just came back again. This is, of course, nonsense, and an educated medieval scholar would have been just as familiar with Plato and Aristotle as anything from the Bible. If you were a commoner, you'd mostly learn through sermons and songs and stories. Obviously, we'll never fully understand the medieval mind because we didn't live through the Middle Ages, but we certainly know that they thought in parables and allegories because they didn't have the same scientific baseline for reality that we do. Hauzinka noted that the medieval mind saw in every event a symbol. Even something as simple as a thunderstorm could potentially be a divine warning, and everyday occurrences would constantly be linked to scripture. We have this modern idea of trying to find meaning in our lives, but in the Middle Ages, meaning was just ingrained in everything you did. I've mentioned a few myths about medieval life, and another one is that people never traveled, and the vast majority wouldn't step foot beyond the boundaries of their village. I've definitely seen that one in my comment section before. This is totally wrong. Actually, considering how dangerous traveling could be back then, the roads were shockingly full. There was a constant flow of pilgrims, friars, jugglers, messengers, merchants, soldiers, and beggars. The fastest way information, or any goods for that matter, could travel was on horseback. A decent rider could cover 30 miles a day, and the great trade routes stretched across the continent like arteries of civilization. There was also a lot of walking involved in medieval travel, and a pilgrim might walk from London to Canterbury in about 4 days, or from Paris to Santiago in about a month. Usually every few miles there were inns, monasteries, or halfway houses for travelers. The inn was sort of the great equalizer, and you might end up sharing a straw mattress with a drunk soldier and a Franciscan friar. A lot has been written about medieval inns, and I feel like they're always talked about as dark and dirty, but that's because contemporary writers describe them that way as an allegory for what they saw as the amoral debauchery that happened in them. In reality, it seems like inns were probably pretty fun, and even though sleeping conditions weren't always the best, you could at least count on a hot bowl of stew and probably sharing some ale with someone that had stories to tell. In an age before mass media, travelers were walking news feeds. They carried gossip, songs, stories, and they did it from one end of Europe to the other. Pilgrimages were done primarily for spiritual purposes, but they were also pretty social. You'd usually meet strangers, you'd trade relics, maybe swap a few jokes. A pilgrim from York recorded in his journal, "We walked with laughter and prayer, and the road was our teacher." Usually now, we'd book a vacation to get away from our regular lives for a little bit, and maybe there was some of that in the medieval mind as well, but travel was usually for a specific purpose. Either you were spreading news or selling goods or walking 1,000 miles so you could touch a saint's jawbone, and that's actually a
We touching niggas' jawline and shit as well.
Perfect segue into my next point, which is that to live in 1325 was to live in a purely Catholic cosmos. It's difficult from a modern perspective to understand how much religion colored the medieval worldview, and even though it's not like Jesus was the only topic anyone ever discussed, the Christian perspective was the baseline of the average person's thoughts and feelings. Eamon Duffy, the author of The Stripping of the Altars, which you should absolutely read if you like this channel, talks quite a bit about how deeply the faith soaked into every moment of daily life. The parish church wasn't just where you went to mass, it was one of the centers of social life in the village, and it was
super deeply ingrained back in the day. I ain't gonna lie.
Noisy and full of hustle and bustle. After mass, young men waited outside to flirt with young women. Children played in the churchyard and ran past bakers selling pies. Bells rang for weddings and deaths, and everyone came. Catholicism also determined how the year was structured because most of the calendar revolved around feast days like Candlemas, Corpus Christi, Michaelmas, and those were all pretty big communal parties. You knew everyone in your village, and yes,
yeah, I feel like the England medieval is like we have more material stuff than any other era in history, but other areas in history were more socially integrated. Like you knew your neighbors, you knew your sermon, and even though there was lots of issues with the medieval system that, you know what I'm saying, like serfdom, lack of pay, overworking, etc., they definitely were more laid back and more intact with their emotions than we are nowadays.
That meant there wasn't much privacy, but there also wasn't much loneliness either, and Catholicism acted as this
double-edged sword. Like on one hand, you never gonna feel lonely, like because a lot of niggas nowadays is lonely. You ain't gonna feel that, but at the same time, you gonna walk in, you gonna see a nigga butt ass naked on the couch just cooling, bro. Like I heard, nigga, it wasn't uncommon for families to just have relations in front of other family members. Like that shit is insanity, my nigga. Like just imagine that shit, bro. That's crazy.
cultural currency that everyone understood. On feast days, towns legitimately came alive with processions and pageants. An English parish record from 1324 notes that the young men and maidens did sing before the image of St. Catherine, and the priest did laugh. Faith was something to be celebrated, and even though monasticism promoted the idea of retreating from the world, your average Catholic layperson wanted to sanctify the world around them instead. The sign of the cross, the smell of incense, the rhythm of the liturgy, the biblical art on the walls of the church that showed you everything you needed to know about salvation and damnation. I'm just hammering the same point here, but again, you didn't need to search for the meaning of life, and you didn't sit around wondering what it all meant. The medieval person was immersed in purpose from birth until death. There might be a separate video specifically about this coming sometime soon, but I want to mention also that the Middle Ages solved the male loneliness crisis before it even existed. If you were a crafts-
Yeah, because that's why, I mean, it's because the thing is that back in the day, they didn't really have that because competition wasn't that high back in the day. Because now we're in a very high competitive era. So if you're not like locked in, grinding all the time, 24/7, like you're gonna be more lonely than other niggas. But that's just what it is to me. You feel what I'm saying?
For example, your guild was your family. Guilds governed everything: prices, apprenticeships, quality, charity. A guild brother who fell sick could rely on support. A widow could count on a pension you were actually taken care of, instead of being cast aside by a faceless corporation that doesn't even know who you are. In return, members swore oaths, attended mass together, and cared for each other's souls. As Barbara Tuchman notes, the medieval man was never alone. This
Liberty Mutual customized my car insurance, so I only pay for what I need. What a great day. What an okay day. What a mess.
This whole complex web of guilds, parishes, and fraternities gave even the weirdest, stinkiest people a sense of belonging. Life wasn't easy, and I don't want to claim it was because they obviously didn't have the conveniences we do, but at least it was shared. And guild feasts sound pretty legendary. We're talking barrels of ale, roasted meat, lot of laughs, songs sung in honor of a patron saint. I honestly think we need to bring this all back. The coolest part about it, too, is that each craft had its own identity. The Coopers had St. Anne, the Weavers had St. Blaise, and work had a sacred dimension because your work was a form of prayer. A mason might carve his initials on a cathedral stone and know he was leaving his mark on eternity. But let's land the plane here. I'm not saying we should all hop into a time machine or that we need to get rid of all the things that make modern life nice. Now that I've had air conditioning, I'm not planning on giving it up anytime soon. However, if you've watched this channel before, you know that my main thesis is that there's a lot we can learn from our medieval ancestors to improve our lives right here and now. The Middle Ages is the only period of history I can think of that is just openly mocked. Nobody seems to take it seriously.
No, I mean, the medieval, it's like any other era. The medieval has their pluses, their downsides, etc. But that just what happens. Like, niggas nowadays are gonna mock something, you feel me? But with that being said, it's time Medieval Madness for the video. Good vid, shout out my dog. But that being said, it's your boy Jay. Stay healthy, stay wealthy, stay blessed, and I'm out.